Few works of human creativity rival the majesty and emotional turbulence of Nintendo's Fire Emblem series, particularly its the Game Boy's Advance entries, Fire Emblem the Blazing Blade and Fire Emblem the Scare Stones, depending on where you lived and how patient you were, represent not only your strategy role playing at its peak, but also the fastest way to ruin your sleep schedule, your social life, and your emotional stability. In this video, we will demonstrate that these games are simultaneously the most fun and the most cruel digital experiences ever released on a 32-bit handheld. In other words, by a wise man. This game made me cry over a pixelated night with 3 lines of dialogue. Fire Emblem GBA's gameplay can be described as chess, but with swords, horses, fireballs, and even the ever-present possibility that your favorite unit will get one-shotted by a random 2 critical hit. Unlike modern games that allow rewind functions, these titles expect you to either accept the consequences of your mistakes like a grown adult or reset the entire chapter in blind panic like the rest of us. The weapon triangle system is often praised as simple but effective. Swords beat axes, axes beat lances, and lances beat swords. But in reality, it works more like your sword unit should win this matchup unless the enemy has spot armor, in which case they'll hit you with a 30% attack and immediately kill you. This is called the Law of Fire Emblem, and it cannot be escaped. The GBA games are rich with characters who, despite being represented by tiny sprites, somehow become more beloved than most Hollywood actors. Blazing Blade gives us Lyn, who spends most of his time of the tutorial session reminding that archers are fragile creatures. Hector, who spends every political problem by hitting it with an axe, and Elowood, who exists. Meanwhile, Scare Stones introduces us to a sibling duo of Erica and Ephraim. Erica tragically has a brain cell count lower than her weapon durability, but we love her anyway. Ephraim, on the other hand, famously says the line, "I'll take them to the fight. I don't pick fights I can't win." This is objectively false, as he proceeds to attack castles guarded by dozens of enemies with a squad the size of a marching band. Side characters are even more ironic. Ross, a trainee unit, starts as a boy who can barely lift an axe, but through the power of grinding, transforms into a god of destruction. Joshua, a midrum, is essentially just as gambler guy, whose head is stronger than most units' defense stats. And of course, there's Self, the Scarestone's paladin who can solo the entire game. Using him feels like cheating, but not using him feels like self-sabotage. Graphically, the Fire Emblem game titles are works of art. The combat animations are unnecessarily flashy for a handheld, to the point where critics often describe them as better than most action movies. A generic sword crit involves at least 3 backflips, some anime yelling, and even sparks to power a small city. Berserker crits, meanwhile, are a religious experience, and Magiello has seen one. The sinister chapel would have been using Ross during a spin attack. The music is equally iconic. The map themes are present enough, but once combat begins, the soundtrack slaps harder than a Raven Knight with max strength. After listening to Determination for 3 straight hours, one begins to question whether this video game or a psychological experiment designed to test human endurance. It is tempting to dismiss the narratives of games just as medieval anime nonsense. However, this would be a grave mistake. Blazing Blade tells us the tragic tale of betrayal, loyalty, and friendship, as our heroes discover that literally every royal adversary is secretly evil. Scared Stones presents the classic drama of 2 nations at war, only to reveal that shockingly a demon egg is involved. This is literature. The villains are particularly noteworthy. Nirgal, the antagonist of Blazing Blade, is basically a wizard whose hobbies include manipulating orphans and looking suspicious in cutscenes. Lion, of scarce stones is much more tragic. A prince who wanted to help his kingdom, but instead made the world's most worst deal with dark magic. In short, the villains are relatively because of all the bad choices they made, though adamantly not usually release the Demon King but bad. To play Fire Emblem for the GBA is to suffer. You will lose a unit you love. Unless you are a cold-blooded monster, you will restart the chapter to save them, even if it's 3 a.m. And if you have work in the morning, some call this bad game design, I'll call it emotional investment. When Dorix dies, you don't lose a fighter, you lose the man whose entire meme legacy was selling beef jerky to feed his sick wife. When Nemia fails, you don't just lose an archer, you lose your support conversations about how bad she's at archery, but trying her best. When Seth dies, you reset the chapter immediately because losing him is equivalent to losing the game. In summary, Fire Emblem on the Game Boy Advance is a paradox, simple yet complex, beautiful but yet cruel, fun yet emotionally devastating. It is not merely a series of strategy RPGs, it's a lifestyle, it's a test of patience. It is the reason your Game Boy batteries died at 4 a.m. It is art, tragedy, and comedy rolled into one tiny cartridge. If you have not yet played these games, I urge you to do so, preferably with a box of tissues and an extra charger, and the mental fortitude to watch 10% hit chance in your run. Because in the end, the true enemy was never the Demon King, nor Nigel, or even the weapon triangle. The true enemy was the RNG.